All right, folks. Welcome. Here we are again. People First podcast coming live from the Construction Life Studio because I love this. It's about partnerships. It's about growing things together, and Manny and folks and Otto and everybody else that makes this possible. Thank you. Thanks for making this possible. Angelo, Mark, I love you guys. It's great to share space.
Thanks for having us.
I'm humbled to have you here. You both bring collectively an abundance of knowledge that we're going to pivot into, not only from Mark. I have a lot of respect for you because you've lived, breathed Brick Lane and
continue to every day,
which is not an easy industry. I walk around and I'm like, who the hell wants to do that?
Mark.
Right?
I want to do it. I want to do all of it.
But the margin is very, because you talk to folks today and they're like, nobody wants to lug mortar and blocks, and it's a harder. Again, I have biases that come in, but I have a lot of respect for that, and you do so and still operate a business doing it.
Yeah, it's mentally taxing. There's a lot of things, but I think it's not just the work. It's also how I got to where I was. So like, I started out really young. Like at 16, I did like a construction program in high school. I was framing houses for Sundial Homes through my schooling. Then I went off to college because my apprenticeship fell through. And then after that, I did my Red Seal training, and I actually worked in Toronto for about 6 years on strictly historical buildings. That was my jam. So, and then after that, I started my own company, and I can say now I've actually been an entrepreneur longer than I've been an employee. So I've actually been running my business for about 11 years now, almost 12, and I almost have 2 decades in my trade. And
you're only 25.
Yeah, and 36. But I wish.
No, and you do it differently, right? So I mean, that's a good segue. I mean, give us the details before I move on, because I want to get to Angelo.
Oh yeah, so like, so what I do is like where our business is basically centered is I could be a blocker, a bricklayer, and just lay on the line, and I could take on big projects. But what I kind of look at is I look at it like I still need me at the end of the day. And so I'm at the point now, and I wasn't always like this, but now I'm actually starting to make room for, like, now that I have like a young family, I got 2 4.5-year-olds, I have a wife, house, like there's things outside of my trade that are more important than it, even though I love my work. But the thing is, I've actually found that I'm actually a mason at home and I'm a mason on the job site. So I've found a way to sort of amalgamate those two things. So like my wife will tell you, every time we walk downtown Hamilton, like I'm always looking at buildings. I'm always looking at things that need repair. I'm always pointing stuff out to my kids. So I'm always going to be a mason. But I think what I've decided to do is I've tried to relax my way into the evolution of my business instead of grind my way into the evolution of my business. So what I've done is I've decided I'm going to stick strictly to like repair, quick turnover jobs, and then I'm going to specialize in historical, which is what I really like doing because that lands me in places like we have a cathedral actually down here in Oakville that we've been restoring for the last 4 years, and we have another 8 on it. So that's revolving door evergreen accounts, and then we've also started working with City of Hamilton and a few other private contractors that have historical buildings. And I get a lot of calls from other masonry companies too, where they're like, we have a historical build. Do you want to take a look at this? And the thing that I find about the work is it's very finesse based and it's very finicky. And there's like a lot of detail and there's a lot of different materials that you have to use, but that sort of slows the pace down a little bit. And it sort of creates more longevity, I think, in the trade instead of just like slugging 12-inch block, putting in 1,000 brick a day, doing that. And again, that's one avenue, but masonry is so vast. Yeah. Like there's guys that are in masonry that are like stone carvers, like artisans, and they aren't really paid based on what they produced. Is it what you wanted at the end of the day? And it's absolutely perfect.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And thank you for getting into it. There's so much more, Angelo, thank you. We've shared some great space together, right? We had some wonderful conversations, and Angelo, I have a lot of respect for you. You've seen and lived so many different things, from small to medium to large organizations, everything in between. You're on a dedicated mission to shift construction, and I'm honored to be in that orbit, and we have some great friends that are also doing that. And Gianluca, if you're out there and you're listening, we appreciate you too, because he's making a big difference. Him, a whole bunch of other folks. Did it happen, or you're coming up to speaking in, is it Calgary?
Yeah, Calgary.
Health?
So Buildex. So Informa is the same organization that puts on the building show in Toronto.
Yeah.
It's kind of the equivalent of the building show out west. So Buildex Alberta, I think it's the biggest construction show on the west coast, on the western part of the country. So yeah, we've got a panel discussion coming up October 23rd there, specific to mental health in construction.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and that was, again, shout out to Gianluca, because he kind of spearheaded that. And we've actually got a podcast lined up for the building show with the site visit podcast on site at the building show in December. So a lot of cool things happening and a lot of good conversations. And just before I go any farther, I just want to reciprocate and say I love you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Because that's what you started with too. And these conversations are very meaningful, especially in today's day and age where everybody's going through so much shit.
Yeah.
And what really struck me, this might be a little off topic, but this is where the good stuff comes out. It's like you mentioned how you're a Mason at work and you're a Mason at home. And I think that might be or may not be unique to the construction industry. Because a lot of times you hear about work-life balance and this and that. To me, I think that stuff's bullshit, because work is part of life.
Yes.
And life is part of work. So to hear you say that you're just who you are and you happen to stumble upon this industry that you can, have a business at, make money, provide for your family, but also have it be part of your identity, I think that's amazing. And a lot of people within the industry in different trades probably share that. Like me too, myself, I think about how I ended up in construction. It was a total fluke. I went to school for engineering and I couldn't find a job as a consultant. So I said, shit, I got to pay the bills. So I applied everywhere and I ended up working for a construction company and I fell in love with it. So yeah. Thanks for having us on. And
you're welcome. And we were talking offline about this and talking about connections, right? I'm connected to you guys, and I remember the first time you and I connected was like, I think it was through Gianluca maybe, or LinkedIn, or whoever it was, and it was the next thing I know, I'm on the telephone with you. We have similarities. Connect with you. There's similarities. I was just talking to about a friend. I was talking to a friend about one of our conversations recently about Atlas Shrugged, the book, which is, for those who haven't read it, I haven't even finished reading it. I'm actually listening to it in audio copy, and he's
got a copy. He's going to pull
59 hours. I think Mark read it. There it is. It looks to me like 1,000+ pages.
It's well loved, as you can see. Look at the font on that.
It's so small.
It's quite an interesting read.
1,056 pages.
Okay.
There's similarities.
I endured that book.
Wow.
And you talk collectively about how much you read and how much you learn, and you were talking about the research you do. This is the shit that gets unacknowledged, right? And I think that it's worth pivoting to today. I really want to pivot into like what it's really like in construction today, the unspoken things that occur, the work that everybody's doing collectively, because it's not just bricks and mortar anymore, right? It's so much more, and yet it's still setting those boundaries and expectations.
I think so just before we got started, you were mentioning well, there's podcasts and there's this and there's that, and I was going to sort of segue that into sort of parenting. So when my parents were parenting me, the only thing that you had was the child psychology textbook, which was thicker than that Atlas Shrugged book, and it was notes written by psychologists for psychologists, which could only be digested by psychologists. So now what we have, and as I raise my kids, is I think you've probably heard of this term like gentle parenting. You've probably, and now there's also all these other avenues you can go down, like when your kid is throwing a tantrum, like there's like redirection, there's all this. And this is something that me and my wife kind of put out. And what I'm how I'm tying this in is there's so much more information, and it's so much more accessible these days with the internet, with Instagram accounts, with podcasts, with all this other stuff. And so I think where we are right now is it's finding the right information and processing it the way that it should be. And I think also back in the day, construction workers, the ones who were like intellectually driven, were sort of like you said, like we're stigmatized. It's like frowned upon. Oh, Poindexter, like what are you doing reading on your break? you know. But meanwhile, in 5 years, that guy's the foreman reading the drawings. Maybe he's the engineer now. Yeah. And you're going, and then it's sort of like, oh, well, he couldn't hack it working. And it's like, no. What he decided to do is he saw a passion of his in the industry. He decided to stay in the industry, which retention is always a big thing in construction. And he decided to better it because he wanted to be the one making the drawings instead of always telling the engineers what to do. He decided to be it. You know, and I think like that's kind of gone away. And the reason why I think that's gone away is because I think I represent like the new generation of construction workers, because when I was coming up, I will tell you, there was no shortage of training. It was very safety driven.
Okay.
It was like I'm talking tons, like confined space, working at heights, WHMIS. Like before you even walked on site, you needed your working at heights and you need your WHMIS, even if you're not dealing with chemicals.
Right.
And you needed to know what an MSDS sheet was. You needed to know, you know, safe practices, toolbox talks, all that. That wasn't happening in the 70s and 80s. And some people think, oh, you know, that's a waste of time. But it has been shown that the more training you provide your guys, the more productive that they are, the safer they will be. And the other thing, too, is something that was taught to me through my safety training was that safety starts at the source, which is you, the worker. And the thing is, people need to start realizing that, and they need to start kind of going forward with that. More often than not, we hear about guys, you know, not tied off, not taking care of themselves, you know. And I think that where a really big thing, and we talked about this, the survival loop that constantly happens. I think the reason why people choose to be unsafe is because they're being pushed so hard into that survival loop that they never really break out of it. It's like, I need to do this sketchy thing because I need to get the job done faster because I need the money because I need to pay my bills.
Yeah. And they're afraid of what's
going to... And the thing is, the thing is too, if a job is being sort of pushed, which happens in construction more often than not.
Almost every job gets pushed. And that's due to planning fallacy, by the way, which I can go into if you want. And it's just kind of like, we push the worker, and then the worker gets it done, and if he got it done, great, and if he gets hurt, well, WSIB takes care of it.
Yeah. And so that raises a good point, if I can jump in there.
Yeah, sure, go ahead, Angela.
The training aspect, because, like, you know, I talk a lot about mental health and the people side of things, and like your podcast too. So, like, take physical health and safety, like you mentioned. I started working in construction mid 2000s, so at that point, safety was already pretty implemented. Although there's seen a big increase in the last 20 years. But you talk to guys who've been around since the 60s, 70s, and safety was like non-existent back then.
Right.
And look at the time and effort that went into improving physical health and safety with safe work procedures and PPE and tying off and all that stuff. And as a result, you know, we're tracking all these metrics, TRIR and all that stuff. And as a result, safety is like through the roof. It's never been safer to work in the industry. People rarely, there's a fatality. When there is, it's a huge deal, as it should be. We're recording all these near misses, first aids, and all like the safety pyramid, all that stuff. Imagine if you applied that same effort, money, and resources into the mental side of things. Because like you said, if you're safe, you're productive. But physical health and safety, to me, is just one component of it. It's the mental side that we haven't really tapped into yet. You know what I mean? So you're training somebody to work safely with tools so they're not going to get hurt so they can keep working. But what if they're fucked in the head mentally because of something that happened that morning or something going on with their lives? And they're not equipped to process that. It's going to impact their safety and their productivity on site, right?
Yeah. Go on.
And I would even take that one step further, and I would say it's a very big ask to get somebody involved in the construction industry. I'll give you an example. So I was actually talking to an accountant the other day, and we were just sort of talking about our jobs and stuff like that. And I said, you know, when I was really young, I had to come to terms with the fact that I might lose a finger. And every day I go into my job and I go, you know what, today might be the day. Like, something, freak accidents happen all the time.
Sure.
I might get a grinder blade in the face, scar me for life, blind me even, you know? People who work like in office jobs, their environment is conducive to humans working in it, whereas the construction site isn't. The construction site is an environment that you shouldn't be in. If you think about it, there's no water, there's no toilets. And when you start talking high rise, it's a concrete slab in like probably 150 feet up from the ground.
Right.
Yeah. When you think about that in an environment, so when we're talking, of course people need training. Of course they're going to be more productive when they feel safer. It's because people need to start realizing that maybe it's been so long since they've been a beginner. But I can tell you when I walked on site and I saw my first system scaffold built up the side of the Chum building, it was like 18 stories high. I'd never seen something. And they were like, yeah, you got to climb that.
Yeah.
And now there were stairs, but still like 18 flights every day for like a month.
I remember there was part of some training that I took, and it took you through the stages of safety training. And when you first start, when you walk as you're a green guy on site, whatever, it's you're unconsciously incompetent because you don't know the risks. Like you said, you see this, you're like, holy shit, what is that? And then you do training and you're consciously incompetent because you're trained, but you still don't have the experience. And then you progress all the way to unconsciously competent, where you said, now you probably wouldn't think twice about climbing scaffold because you've done it and you know what to do and you tie off this and that. But there's that process. But when you're a beginner, when you're just starting, like going back to the point of like, it's a lot to ask people to get into the industry. It's inherently dangerous, man. There's tons of risk on a construction site. And I remember when I first started my career, I was a couple years in, we were doing a 9-story research tower in Toronto. And no offense, but this was a mason. It was concrete, and then they had a steel penthouse, and they were doing the block on the side of the mechanical penthouse. And there was a little atrium on the side. So I was walking through here, and there was fucking mortar just raining down. And I looked up, and it's because they were doing the block up top. But there was no tape or anything. And it was that moment where I realized, like, I could be the safest person in the world. If somebody else is being stupid, or if he drops a trowel or something and it falls 10 stories and goes through my hard hat and kills me, it's like, so there is a level of trust. There's inherent risk, but there's also inherent trust that's involved in working in a construction site. Yep. Which is ironic because we've talked about in the past how mistrust is rampant in construction. So that's a good juxtaposition.
This is interesting. I just want to hold this space for a second because the training you're talking about, I believe, is supervisor training. So anybody who hasn't done it, it's very important. I want to hang in this space for a second because let's pivot to this. I was talking to a young individual. He's 20, 21, curious about becoming an electrician. So I guided him as much as I could, and he found himself in a position where he got a job. And to your point, Angela, he was up on, call it a catwalk of some sort, and he had to. The role was to go across this catwalk and grab some Cat 5 cables and pull them across something. He was up there, and he was physically safe from all measurable metrics. Physically safe. There was guardrails. He had a harness on. He was tied off. Everything was secured. He called me because he was freaking out. He called me because he looked over the edge and he realized at that moment in time, he's like, I could die. I could fall. And he quit. He's like, I can't do this anymore. He had to take time off. It just came back to me when you're talking about, because many of us have lived that, you're like, what the fuck's going on? You got mortar raining down on you. And you know, that thought that occurred in your mind, like, I could die. So tell us a little bit more about that. Like speak to what you believe occurs there, what we could do, and what we're currently doing.
I think there's a lot that's being done, again, on the physical side of things, right? Like there's, you put up hoarding, you put up guardrails, you do lanyards, but there's the mental component. Like you were saying, this gentleman who spoke to you was by the book safe, but wasn't there mentally. So how are we equipping people mentally to deal with this stuff, right? Like, do you prepare them and say, hey, you know what, you're going to have these thoughts and you might want to quit, but it's part of the job or whatever. At least they're able to, think about it.
So awareness, okay.
Awareness, yeah. Or when you're in that moment, dealing with, like when you have those feelings of anxiety or nervousness or fear, what do you do with it? Because a lot of people don't know what to do with that feeling, right? It just kind of takes over you and you go fight, flight, or freeze, and your nervous system takes over and you're just like an animal at that point. So I think
I've been that animal.
Yeah.
So can I share my experience?
Absolutely, please do.
Yeah.
So I actually worked on a very tall building in downtown Toronto, and I went over the side of it, and it was about 1,700 feet plus. Okay, so we were doing swing stage work. And our job was to take the stone off the building and then drill into it and create a flange for a self-elevating platform that went up the side of the building so they could take the stone down and put big glass panels in its place because it was falling off the building. So what I was doing is I was working 8 I'm not exaggerating this, 16 to 17 hours a day
Okay.
doing that. And and what was binding me to that job were the guys I was working with.
What do you mean?
So I was about 22 years old with something to prove and a big chip on my shoulder. And I was also a very resilient, and I'm also a very stubborn individual. I've gotten a little bit less I'm more efficient now, but I was one of these kids that was like, let's go until it breaks.
Sure.
Let's see what happens, right? And by the way, I don't know. There are other guys out there that are very much like that. There's guys my age right now that are doing it, but there's no longevity in that. I don't see it.
Not sustainable.
It isn't sustainable. And so what ends up happening is I worked 21 days straight like that. I was literally catching the train, first one out, last one out.
Okay.
And that's what I was doing, in and out of Toronto all the time. I was getting home just in time to collapse into my bed, fall asleep for 6 to 7 hours, wake up, and do it all again. After a while, you find out what you're made of very, very quickly. And these men also were pushers. So it was never an easy day up on top of that roof. It was always mortars are showing up, like big motors are showing up, 3,500 pounds a piece. We got to get them from the loading dock all the way up here. We got to throw the cables over the side. You working this Saturday? Oh, why aren't you working this Saturday? You got a wife and kids at home, mortgage? No? So why aren't you working this Saturday? So the thing is, but then you sort of, through that sort of like pushing, you start becoming part of the team. And then it almost becomes like the cool kids, if you can imagine. So now when somebody else comes into the mix, it's like, you haven't proven yourself. We've been here 21 days doing this stuff, and you think you're just going to walk in? And it was funny too, because there was a night shift and then there was a day shift, but the day shift would always bleed into the night shift because we were actually seen as the productive crew. Yeah. So what ended up happening is now there's this sort of like pride, like it's like a badge that it's invisible, sure. But this is the stuff that we're talking about, right? But that leads you to do some really stupid things. And we luckily didn't run into any near misses or anything like that. But looking back now, like,
what do you learn?
I learned what I was made of, and then I learned what I don't want to do with the rest of my life.
Okay, so unpack both of those. What do you mean? Yeah. I learned what I was made of.
Yeah. So it basically showed me that at 22, I could basically keep up with people that had been in the industry for longer than me, which I always thought was sort of a proving ground, because all throughout my career, I've always been the young guy. So when I was in college, I was 18. I couldn't even drink. So I got put in like a rural town with a bunch of like guys from like Carleton Place, Arnprior, like, you know, like basically out Ottawa way. I completely got transported and put there.
Okay, so good. So that develops your competence level and your confidence level. Now you're like, I can actually, so we talk about pushing ourselves beyond limits. You obviously pushed beyond limits and established new baselines. Yeah. Okay.
And then on top of that, like my internal drive is I want to see what I can do.
Okay.
I want to see how far I can push it. I would say at around like day 10, I was like, well, we're here at day 10. Let's see if we can go to day 15. Let's see if we can go to day 21. But the thing is, what I learned at the end of that is then the lack of sleep catches up with you. You start not recovering properly. And then certain things like with this company, like then little politics start pulling into play. And then all of a sudden, for no reason at all, I got pulled off the roof. Like, not like physically, but just they were like, oh, we need you to go here now. And I was kind of like, but it's not done. And they're like, it doesn't matter. You're needed here now. Because that's just how it goes. Yeah. And I was kind of like, so then what happened is at the end of that, it was like there was no loyalty. There wasn't really like, there was kind of a team, but not really, because they didn't really have the power to keep us all together. And then eventually the job got done, and that was it. And every time, and that happened a lot with that company, there was a lot of like, okay, like we've gotten you to this position now we're going to move you. And at the time, I was sort of seeing that as like, what, I'm not good enough to finish the project? That was because nobody was coaching me. Nobody was so invested in you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the thing is, like, I had a lot of pride in what I did, because the thing is, I'm a very analytical person. I'm also very detail focused. So it's like every time you moved me, it took a little bit of passion away from me. And then on top of that, if I'm going, well, if they're able to do this and I'm not in control of this, then I'm not going to stay here.
Interesting.
Maybe you started outshining the everybody else. And
you know what? It was a really interesting dynamic. I think it was good in terms of like it kept you on your toes. And I think when you're a young man, I think you do need that to a certain extent. It's like, it's not abuse, but it's almost like it keeps you straight and narrow. Because I can tell you right now, working in the union, you're up early. And I can tell you that worked out aces when I started my own business. I was on site by 7. Mm-hmm. The clients were coming out of their doors and, oh, you're here. Yeah, I'm here. We start at 7. Oh, and I go all the way till 4. And they're like, this is great.
Yeah.
Like,
I think you touched on something there too. I know, sorry I interrupted you.
No,
but,
go ahead.
Something that I see come up a lot in different literature and research is a stressor in construction is the transience of the workforce. Because like a lot of people, they're on site one day and they don't know. Like you were there for 21 days and they pulled you off. You didn't get an explanation. You don't know if you fucked something up or you just needed somewhere else, or maybe they thought you were working too much or whatever. Or like seasonal work.
I would have
too.
loved if they told me I was working too much.
Exactly.
I would have
got some closure.
Yeah.
But like, you've got people, especially now with the rising cost of living, everything's so expensive, trying to buy a house, even groceries. If you don't know where you're going to be next week or next month or next tomorrow, it'll play on your mind, man. And it creates an extra stress that you're carrying
the thing
around.
we're talking about, the mental capacity, right? So what does it look like to get, I tie this into, some folks don't get this, so I'm going to tie it into athletics. Think of many athletes out there who compete for rep team positions and then don't make the team. Very infrequently is there any sort of exit meetings. Jonathan, you didn't make the cut and here's why. Here's the feedback. You're talking about a very similar thing, what you experienced. Shit, 21 days in, you're vested in, you're like, you're wearing that badge of honor. You've learned a lot about yourself. You care about the guys doing the work. And all of a sudden it's like, Mark, we don't want you. We don't need you here anymore, with no explanation. Mm-hmm. Look at the ripple effect that plays, right? Yeah. How many times does it happen where folks start a task or a job and don't see the end of it? And then you got to carry that burden mentally.
Or you look at like a big site, like we came up in conversation, South Niagara Hospital. Okay, sure. That's going on now. $2 billion hospital. There's probably going to be 1,000 guys on site. I remember being on big sites too, and you talk to people, whether they're plumbers, electricians, whatever, and they'll just come out and tell you, I don't give a fuck what happens on this job, because when you don't need me, I'm going to go back to the hall and I'm just going to go to the next one. That's not how everybody thinks. But a lot of people at times that's the mentality, because that's how they've been treated. And I'm not saying that person's bad for thinking that way. It's just they're a product of the...
They don't start that way.
Yeah.
Nobody starts that way.
But I feel like it's just they're a product of their environment. Where you're being treated as a resource to get a job done. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's kind of like politicians. I hate to say that word, but it's like politicians. I think they start out with the best intentions, and then they get into the game board, and then they start realizing what it's actually like.
Sure.
And then they're like, oh shit, I can't be this virtuous, upstanding individual and keep the board from not tilting. Mm-hmm. And the thing is it's like, so we could dive and speculate into the trades themselves. But I think really, and this is why I appreciate what Angelo does and what you do, is I think it really... The message here is it's always has to come back to the individual. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, when we talk about, like you touch base, like cost of living and all these things, what I've actually kind of in my head and what I've read is people need purpose.
Right.
If you don't have purpose, you're just a shell. And that has been spoken about tons of times. And the thing is, if people aren't finding purpose in your work, you need to change your work. Mm-hmm. I see a lot of purpose in my work. I also see a lot of truth in my work, because masonry can't really lie. The wall isn't plumb, it's not plumb. If it's crooked, it's crooked. Mm. You can't really do much about that. You know what I mean? And it's sort of one of these things that like tradespeople, like I think that they get into these positions and they sort of lose that sort of shine and that luster. And it's through like hard work. They don't track their mind properly. A lot of people don't actually know how their brain works. And the more that I've actually started reading, right now I'm working my way through Ray Dalio's Principles. Mm-hmm. And he's got a whole chapter right now just based on brain, your neocortex, your pineal glands, like how they actually interact with your body. If you talk about like, if you go into Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, he also talks very in depth about the brain, like systems 1 and 2, your subconscious and your conscious mind, and those things. Like I had to look for that myself. School didn't teach me that.
Right.
I'm choosing to navigate those waters myself, and I think I'm a better person for it, because now when something happens and my emotional response spikes, I know where that's coming from. That's not coming from my upper brain. It's coming from my lower one. And then I have to decide whether or not I'm going to react to that. But who on site is having these conversations?
Nobody.
Nobody's having these fucking conversations.
But like you recognize that within yourself.
Yes.
So you're able to, take a moment and think and pause before you react. But you can also recognize that in other people having that knowledge. So you're able to help others too. And it goes back to the whole training thing. Like, why isn't there more training on this stuff in construction? And it doesn't have to be like a 4-year psychology degree. It's just that conversation. Like, look, guys, a lot of times people just react without thinking, and it's knee jerk, and you tell somebody to fuck off or you punch somebody in the face. But take a second between, oh, my watch just broke, between that stimulation and response, and let cooler heads prevail.
And what could it look like to tie that into even a toolbox talk, right? Toolbox talks are here's how to set up a scaffold, here's 3-point ladder stands. Okay, even if you put something super simple as far as, something to do with, neuroscience or the brain, reactions. Guys, know your trigger word. Somebody tells you to fuck off before, count to 4. I don't know, something super simple that...
And it's a language thing. It's a communication. Like you said, you don't have to get into, oh, guys, here, read this book, Atlas Shrugged. They're going to look at it and be like, what the fuck are you talking?
Yeah.
Just you speak construction. Say,
I got beers I got to drink at home.
Exactly.
I don't have time for this shit.
Say next time somebody pisses you off, just think about it before you tell them to fuck off.
And to add to that too, like, I mean, I've sat in the training, and I still remember, like, all the like working from heights and all that stuff. When I was working, there was like a very big Polish dominated like workforce.
Sure.
A lot of them didn't speak English.
Okay.
A lot of them cheated off the tests. A lot of them didn't care. And the thing is, that also was sometimes seen by the foreman as well. So sometimes the foreman was also too cool for school, as you say. So, the trainer's up there and they're doing it, and it's not really coming out of their pocket. It's coming out of the company's pocket. And, they're kind of there, oh, yeah, this guy doesn't know fucking anything, safety trainer, blah, blah, blah. What's he doing here? Why isn't he on site? And, like, now that I'm here, I got to admit, I rolled with that. I agreed with them at some points. Like, oh, yeah, the guy doesn't fucking know anything, blah, blah, blah. But now, like, looking back on it, I'm like, how ignorant were we to think that, like, the trainer took time out of their day to do this and to train us. He didn't have to train us. Mm-hmm. And then he tried to give his best experience to us so that we are more safe on the job. Like, my mentality's changed completely about that. But try sticking it, a 22-year-old who's trying to, be one of the boys.
But do you think that stigmatism still exists, or do you think there's more self-awareness now for the younger generation, the guys in their early 20s the guys and gals who want to get into it? Are they sitting through it, or are they just still being...
I think they're sitting through it because they don't have the experience and confidence to, like, back it up. Like, so the way that it worked is a lot of the, like, guys that have been doing this for like 10, 20 years, like, you really can't teach an old dog new tricks. There's a lot of reasons for that. As we get older, the brain doesn't get as squishy.
Yeah.
It doesn't absorb the same amount of information. So when you're trying to train up somebody who's like 40 years old plus, it's really not getting in.
Yeah,
like, the information...
I'm 40 and I'm insulted.
What are you noticing?
Be accepting of this.
Look,
God damn it, Angelo.
Yeah.
You do specialized work specifically around these. What are you noticing?
So it's a really interesting point, and there were a couple things that came to mind when we were talking here, because it's a culture thing. It comes down to a culture thing. Because like you were saying, you had a feeling in the pit of your stomach that the way these guys were acting was wrong, but you went along with it anyways, because that's just what you had to do to fit in.
You're trying to fit in.
I think
You're trying to fit in, sure.
A lot of people are experiencing that. And to your point, younger people these days, they're taught to think more critically. They're taught to be true to themselves, and they're told all this stuff. So when they're faced with that situation, I think they're the ones saying, fuck this, I'm out of here. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to assimilate with that because I don't want anything to do with it. And I think that's contributing to what we're seeing in retention and people leaving companies and the industry. And just going back to another thing you mentioned before, because there's a lot of power in it, and we can talk about it more or not. But I remember reading somewhere, like it's a basic human requirement. People want to feel valued, appreciated, and contribute to something bigger than themselves.
Absolutely.
Purpose. So let's look at what we're doing for people in the construction industry. Okay, the stigma against construction workers. Do we really appreciate them?
No.
Society? No.
I can say that. I saw a Yorkville ad the other day. I almost said to you and you.
Pay compared to the work we do, the risk and the danger and the safety, all that stuff. Are we paying them properly?
No.
And are we making them see the bigger purpose of what they're contributing to, whether they're building a bridge or building or whatever? I don't think we do a very good job of that either, because we're just told, okay, you're going to this job, here's your tools, see you later. So we're failing people at 3 basic human levels, and then we're wondering why there's going to be a shortage in the industry.
I also think that it's also one of these things where people get into it for the wrong reasons, and then when they leave, other people see that happen, and then they follow.
What do you mean by that? What do you think they get into when you say get into it for the wrong reasons?
So they get into it for the money.
Sure.
You can't. So something that I still remember. One of my mentors, Phil Noble, he said it. GC guy, I used to work with him when I started when I was 14, demoing houses with him, and he said, "Get good at what you do, the money will come. Get good at what you do, the money will come." He goes, "Don't worry about all that." He was also the same guy that also told me, "Go get the money," meaning. If they are sitting there and they say, "Oh, I got your money right here," don't go, "Oh, no, don't pay me." No, go get it. He's the same guy that told me that. And I will say, like, the biggest plague that's happening that I see right now is COVID was very good to the construction industry. Tons of money to be made, big openings, labor shortages. Like I don't want to get into that because it's kind of a moot point at this point. We're here, we're there, we're already here now with the labor shortage. I saw this coming when I was 16. That's why I got into bricklaying. Average age was 57. That's why I got into bricklaying, because I knew in 10 years they're all retiring and I'm going to be in my prime. Bingo. I'm still riding that horse. And it's great.
Sure.
And the thing is, I just happen to have a passion for it too, because I like working with my hands. But if you don't have that passion, you don't need to be here. And the other thing too is I feel like there's 2 things. So one is, people get into it for the money. They realize that they have to do something outside of their passion for that money. And then they go, this isn't where I'm supposed to be. So they leave. But then when you see that person leave, let's say me and Angelo are working close together. And Angelo's a really great guy. Me and him always chat and we talk about our lives and all that type of shit. And we're tying rebar or doing some menial job, right? And then all of a sudden Angelo goes, "You know what? I'm thinking this isn't for me." And he goes. Leaves. Well, where the fuck does that leave me? Mm-hmm. I don't want to go talk to fucking Tony. Because Tony's fucking 50 and he hates me because I've been talking to Angelo and I've been developing the relationship here. So now it's kind of like, well, where does that leave me? Like, do I keep doing this? And, maybe Angelo was a good part of my day, because there were those relationships that I did have when I worked in big companies, and then people leave and then it's kind of like, well, now I follow. And it kind of like creates this sort of like, and then who knows who I was impacting when I left. Yeah. Because I can tell you when I left my company to go start my own, there's about 6 or 7 other guys that I actually worked very closely with that they went and started their own companies too.
Sure.
So it was kind of just one of these things, like everybody just kind of like left. And now the company, from what I know now, is like there's still a few guys that I know that are still working at it, and that's great for them and they've moved up and fantastic, but it's not the same. It's not the same. The dynamics change completely.
I think that's a really good point. I agree 100%, man. Like, we were just having this conversation. We did a little presentation at a high school. It was a panel discussion. They had different tradespeople, and I was lucky enough to be part of that. And everybody else was talking about money. Oh, there's a big shortage, and you can make a lot of money in construction. And even the stuff you see the government's pushing in the media and whatever, it's all about wages. 5 years in, you can be making over $100,000 as a journeyman or whatever, depending on what trade, what location.
It's actually $50,000 when you factor in inflation and like, you know what I mean?
But when you first start, like as a first year apprentice or something, you can go to Walmart and make the same amount of money.
Yep.
So they're being told, yeah, you can make a lot of money in construction. So they're like, yeah, I'm going to make a lot of money in construction. And they show up on site and they see all the stuff that we didn't tell them about. like the work they got to do, because it's hard work. There's no way you're going to get around that. Exactly.
Which you're very lucky to have, by the way.
The old crusty guy that they got to work with, and they're not sticking around. So you couple that with the fact, like we mentioned before, it's just not normal, quote unquote normal, for people to stick with careers these days. People are jumping. Like I've moved companies a couple times. People are doing that at an industry scale. So you take something like bricklaying or pipe fitting, whatever, where you have a 4 or 5 year apprenticeship, and people's attention spans these days, it's tough to make it through those 5 years unless you're really dedicated and it really clicks and it really aligns with your passion.
And there's a good atmosphere that you work in and stuff like that.
So what do you share? What did you share with these individuals on this panel then?
I said construction is not for everybody. Like you were saying, the money will come if you're passionate about it and you want to stick it out and you find that you like it. But I took it beyond construction. I said, don't get into any specific industry just for the money, because you'll never be happy. You'll never be fulfilled.
And I feel like that is a very large gap, but it needs to be bridged. It's like we need to start bringing in construction and let people know that it's like, it's all industries. Like it doesn't have to do just with construction. It's like be passionate about something. Mm-hmm. Like move it all the way through.
And that was provocative. Like construction is not for everybody. What do you say next? What So now it's provocative, and I'm like, this guy's fucked up. What's he talking about? I want to hear more.
Even as I say that, it's like, because there's different takes on it, right? Construction is for everybody in the sense that you want to promote it to all types of people. Because one thing we've done a bad job in the past is creating a diverse, and I don't want to get into DEI, but I'll just use the term, a diverse group demographic of people. It's predominantly white guys. Yep. There's European descent, a lot of people, whatever, that immigrate, but predominantly white guys. So we need to increase the I guess make it more welcoming for other types of people, whether it's women, people of color, whatever, to even that out. So construction is for everybody in that sense, but it's not for every type of personality. Because not everybody wants to be outside in the cold, slugging pipe. Some guys love it, and that's great if you do. But if you don't like it and you go into it just for the money, don't do it.
That's what I want to hear, right? Like that gets me excited. You know, if you're a guy who likes to be physically active, then this might be something for you. Mm-hmm. If you have something where you want to be doing something different and sitting in front of I had a conversation with a gentleman, Matt, who he pivoted to construction later in his career. Why? Because he was tired of looking at a screen and he wanted something different. That's what's important. I don't want to touch it because I don't. My philosophies are: you hire somebody for their skill set. Mm-hmm. Yep. Period. You hire them for their skill set because they want to do what they want to do. Mm-hmm. Yep. Right. I'm not a component, and those can hate on me, but for people
you might love to build, but you might not have the hands for it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's really what it comes down to. You might not have the physical composition for it.
Look, like I go to sports again, right? I love hockey. Okay, but you know what? If you're not a top tier guy, you're on the first line. You're a grinder, man. You're line 4. You love the game. That's your role. You learn. I'm not going my hands. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do something different, still related.
Well, this was another thing too that came up with the kids, because a lot of them were younger too, right? Some of them were grade 10, so they don't really know what the fuck's going on. Sure. No offense to kids,
which I think is a bit of an issue too.
Well, okay, we'll get back to that.
We'll get back to that.
That's society.
But like you ask people, what do you know about construction? What trade would you want to get into? Everybody says plumber or electrician.
Sure.
And that was one thing I said, please do yourself a service and look into the fucking 100 different trades you can get into in construction. And to your point, you might not have the hands to be a bricklayer, but if you like building, be a controls technician.
Yeah.
You get your tiny little screwdriver and you got your little hands and you get in there. But there's a whole world in construction. It's not just like people think construction and it's like, I'm thinking of concrete and this and that. But there's project management. There's estimating. There's fucking HR. There's so many different components.
Specialized technicians, man.
So you don't necessarily have to be a builder. Mark's gonna say something good. I can see it on his face.
No,
here.
I'm loving it, because the thing is, like, that's people. So transferable skills.
Sure.
Transferable skills. I should just have it in big, beautiful neon letters. Mm-hmm. When you are in construction, you are going to deal with people. You are going to deal with buildings. You are going to deal with scheduling. You're going to deal with costing. If you decide to be an entrepreneur, you're going to deal with everybody's lovely term, taxes. You're going to deal with all of this shit. And the thing is, I haven't attempted it yet because, again, I love what I do, but I could probably go and manage a site because of my skill set and my transferable skills and learning how to talk to people.
Well, you said at the beginning of the conversation, you're a bricklayer at work and a bricklayer at home.
Yeah.
So what do you mean there's transferable? Talk to us about that.
Well, the thing is, like, so, like, when I'm at home, I don't know why, but every bricklayer that I talk to, we all love to cook. I cook at home.
Okay.
Because mixing mortar is just a recipe. I follow recipes better than my wife does sometimes. And, like, that's the thing is, like, you know, or, like, for example, if I need to move furniture, well, I have the physical constitution because I'm used to lugging block. So when she needs it moved from there to there, I don't call somebody. I do it. You know, I have also a good set of tools. So it's like when we were doing our house, like we bought a wartime home, I redid all the floors. Why? Because I used to demo houses. Again, construction transferable skills. I'm able to do this. But the other thing too is fractions, because I know how to read a tape measure. God damn it! So it's like now then also because it's bricklaying, bricklayers do our tolerances are in millimeters.
Sure.
So the thing is now I have to learn metric.
Okay.
So now when we're talking about drawings, when somebody gives me a set of drawings, I go, is it metric or imperial? And more often than not, it's a metric. And I'm like, okay, so now I know what that looks like. So when they're talking about a 3 meter height, I know that's roughly 10 feet.
Well, see, you just debunked the it's more than money, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there's a lot of people who just go through and show up at their job every day and they don't use the math skills that I use. You know, I also know how to throw archways and throw curves and stuff like that too for figuring out brickwork and trigonometry. I use that stuff.
What do you think about the tape measures with the digital display?
You know what? Honestly, the thing is, I'm all for efficiency. If that makes your job more efficient, go for it.
Yeah.
It doesn't make mine, but if you are comfortable with that, like that's the other thing is like I grew up in the transition period where like we still had old school guys that were still yelling at us and abusing us and mentoring us in the best way they knew how at the time. Again, child psychology book, right? But now I'm finding people are it's weird to think because I'm still so young. People call me and they're like, "Hey, I wonder what your advice is on this." And I'm like, first of all, I'm flattered. Second of all, here's what I would do. And they're like, "Oh, it's really good." And it's generally like, you know, I read this book or I did this or, you know, I've been in this scenario before. And it's weird to think of myself as a professional because I don't think of myself at that level. I still think of myself as I'm still journeying. Yeah. You know? And
well, I think humility has a lot to do with it, and like you're always continuously learning, and that was one thing I wanted to kind of jump to, if that's okay, is like what people think of when they think of a tradesperson, right? And you think of somebody who's just doing physical work and manual, but like you just said, there's all these skills, learning how to deal with people, math, fractions, psychology, like there's all this different stuff. So
scheduling is huge.
You know, you don't end up
commitments.
You don't end up in the trades because you're stupid. Because it's just a certain way that your brain works. And it's not funny, it's interesting seeing now, there was a study I saw about the prevalence of neurodivergence in construction workers.
Okay.
And I think it might be because at a point in time when the schooling system was the way it was when I was in it anyways, you were kind of in the normal class or you had like a learning disability or whatever. And you were kind of discounted if you read differently or your brain worked differently. So they didn't encourage you to go to college or university, so you usually ended up in a blue-collar type of job. Not because you were not as smart or as intelligent as other people, but because you learned differently and you didn't meet the requirements that were set for this certain type of person.
Right.
And they ended up going into trades like construction, auto mechanic, whatever. So now it's just interesting knowing more about that. And
I'm one of them.
Yeah.
100%. I had my math teacher tell me I wouldn't amount to anything in my math career.
Yeah.
And then I took college math and I aced it with a 98% because I know trig. I know how to do square footages because I'd been working with it already because I was used to it.
Sure.
But you just learned differently?
And I just, no, like, I shouldn't say I learned differently. It's just I need the practicality. Like, the equation doesn't make sense unless you put a dollar sign in front of it. Why am I learning about a parabola? Teach me about money. Teach me about taxes. Teach me about, you know, these things as well. And I mean, we could go down the rabbit hole of the educational system. I mean, I don't think it's really conducive to tradespeople. And these days, I mean, they teach such a broad spectrum of the curriculum. They're not really like narrowing it down. And I also think that because everybody gets a pass, there's no accountability. So then if I want to segue this into the younger construction worker coming in, so let's say you start out 18 years in, boom. Okay, I want to get into construction, right? For this whole 18 years, you can show up late, you can not show up to class, and we'll still pass you, okay? So now everybody gets the award. Here's your graduation, get the fuck out of here. Shows up to construction site, we start at 7 a.m. Well, the habits haven't been driven
Sure.
into this individual. I started working when I was 12. Like, I worked at a Harvey's. I had to show up for my shift. You know what I mean?
Commitment, yeah.
Yeah, and then at 14, I started working construction, demoing houses. I had to show up.
Yeah.
Because if I didn't show up, then it put the schedule off. And other people were counting on me. So the lack of accountability is like really, really, really heavy right now. And then, and it's just kind of one of these things that like that's why I'm almost getting to the point now where like, I think people need to realize something like in construction, like we almost need to make it so it's like scarce. Like we don't want you. Like you need to have certain things in you in order to apply. It's not like one of these things where it's an easy fallback job anymore.
So I want to hold on to that thought for a second, especially accountability. Otto, I'm going to do something that's tremendously unorthodox and I'm a little bit embarrassed about, but full bladder, empty mind. So all I can think about right now is
washroom.
I got to take a leak. So can you push the pause button and we're going to come back to accountability. Haven't done this one.
Action.
So thanks guys for that. Vanessa's going to make fun of me when she's probably going to make a clip about it, but I always say, man, like full bladder, empty mind. If you think I'm full of shit, next time you have to go pee, think about what you think about.
I think we should
nothing except I have to go pee.
I think we should dub over some sound effects. And that. Just like,
As they take a drink of water.
Flowing or something. So we were talking about
I
accountability.
want to come back to accountability because that's a big topic. Go on. You were talking about it.
So one thing I was saying is I was just like, if you're going through the school system, like you can show up late, you can do all these things. Like I skipped class too, I did, but the teachers also kicked our ass. And like the thing is, I skipped the classes that I didn't like. You know, it wasn't right, but I did it. So I'm not gonna sit here and say I was a saint. However, I did graduate with honors because of my construction that I took, like because I took shop and then I took that course that was offered at White Oaks. But again, at a very young age, though, I was getting up early. I was showing up to work. And my parents also kind of put that into me as well, as they were like, if you're going to work, you have to show up. And then it's funny because you know the saying in the industry, showing up is 50% of the job.
But does that still exist, right? Where like, you know, you talk about an innate desire, you're getting up early. I don't know, boys. Like this is a contentious topic where it's pulling on my heartstrings to say, I think that our society's pivoted too far the other way now. We're just like, we're a little bit too fucking fluffy and soft. Like, if you want to sleep in, and you do you. Like, no, man. Yeah. You got commitments. Honor your word. Keep your integrity to yourself first. Yeah. You committed to something, do it. Yeah. Period.
Well, and that's what we kind of talked about too, was the direction that kids are getting. Because I mentioned some of the kids we talked to are like 15, 16 years old, and they're like, I don't really know what I want to do. And I remember being at that age, and I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. But you got to have some sort of guidance and direction. And if you just say, you know what, Mark, you can be whatever you want in the world. You can be this, that, you can do whatever.
What does that mean?
You're going to be like, you're going to be looking over here. Oh, that's not working. You're going to be over. So you need to provide.
It makes it too broad.
Yeah.
It makes it too broad.
And this is how my kids are still young, but our philosophy is, they need some direction. So you push them in this direction. If they don't like it, that's fine. But at least we're going to point them in the right general vicinity. And at least they're learning how to make
decisions.
Yeah, because it's important to learn what you don't want to do too.
Yes.
So accountability, commitment is I think what we're talking about. And it's funny because my experience is similar to yours. My parents owned a restaurant because like every Greek Canadian, they got into the restaurant industry. I don't know why, but
thank you for that. I love
problem.
Greek food.
Me too. I love it. But same thing. When I was 12, I started washing dishes. And I didn't have an option to call in sick or, not go because I didn't feel like it, because I would have got my ass kicked by my dad. And that was instilled in me. And I think you need to have a little bit of that fire in you to work in the construction industry in a lot of jobs. And you can't teach it. You can't teach it to somebody coming into school at 18, 19 if they haven't been exposed to it, because they're going to have a hard time with it.
And the thing is, too, like with my mentors, is they showed me early on the impacts of me not showing up. So it was kind of like, Mark, where are you? Because there were days, Mark, where are you? I'm not showing up. Okay, why? Oh, this happened. Okay, well, we'll talk about it later. I show up the next day. Hey, listen, I just want to let you know that because you didn't show up, this, and this isn't happening. Mm-hmm. And now I'm like, oh, shit. So I've actually... And this is the other thing too is I cared about impacting somebody else,
because it goes back to what you were talking about. Human beings want to be seen, heard, understood. It's about information, autonomy, and contribution. Now somebody's showing you, Mark, because you didn't show up, your contribution impacted things downstream. We don't do that, I believe, and these are my biases, folks. I don't believe we do that enough by holding people accountable. Say, look, man, you fucked up. Like when you take responsibility for your own life, there's nobody else to blame. So you took responsibility. You didn't show up. The ripple effect of that is you now affected Jonathan and Angelo, and it gets down to commitment, scheduling, and everything else.
Most people who are reasonable, I hesitate to use that term, but most people who are reasonable will understand that. Like the way it was explained to you, it had an effect on you. But like a lot of times you don't get that explanation, and people just fucking yell at you.
But you need it when you're young.
Yeah.
The thing is, the reason why you need
100% you need it, but I don't think people are getting it.
They aren't.
A lot of times you're just getting shit.
Well, because a lot of kids these days, they aren't getting into the job market at a young age. They aren't trying to earn at a young age, and it's not setting them up for success because, unfortunately, not a lot of them need to. Their parents are there's a lot of studies out there, and I've looked at this, but parents are having kids later on in life, and because they're having them later on in life, they're more financially secure, so they're able to take care of their kids a little bit better, so then they don't have to go out and work necessarily to contribute to the family or contribute to themselves. When I was growing up, my parents, my parents are great. What they did is they instilled in me, they were like, if you want something, you go get it. We'll provide you to survive, but if you want like a nice pair of shoes, if you want cool clothes, you got to go out and earn that. If you want to go take the girls out on a date on Friday, that's your money. That's coming out of your pocket, out of your account. So at a very young age, I was doing math. My dad remembers, he's like, you were sitting there at 11 years old and you're like, okay, if I clean my grandma's toilets and I cut the grass and I do this, I can make $20 a week. And I was like, okay, so $20 a week, that's $80 a month. And I was like, okay, and for that I can buy all the gum and Jolly Ranchers that I want.
Sure.
And I don't have to go to my parents to ask. And it's that mentality that like sort of propelled me into this sort of like construction world, is because I was money hungry when I was very young. But we're talking about like a 11 to 14-year-old. We're not talking about learning how to be money hungry at 21 when you have bigger purchases like a car, like a house, jewelry for the girlfriend, this type of stuff, right? So the thing is, you want things to start out young so they're more attainable, so that you get used to that momentum, so that when you start gaining in your life, by the time you hit 21, you're like, okay, this is what real money looks like.
Well, that's the kind of thing we talk about the schooling system, but like financial literacy, like why, maybe that stuff's being taught now, I don't know, but I never learned stuff like that. I
had
a post recently, and it was funny. I had a couple chuckles because part of it was about what they teach you in school versus real life.
Yeah.
And like I took mechanical engineering, and not once in 20 years of working has anybody ever asked me to solve a triple integral or calculate the heat transfer through an infinite sphere. But that's the kind of shit you learn in school.
But this is
and that's what you're required to absorb and memorize to pass a test, and then it's gone from your brain the next second. But like life is just so, and I know you can't cater to every different situation, but
it reminds me of a meme. It's like, oh, they taught us parabolas in school. I'm so glad that they taught us that, because when parabola season comes around,
I'm prepared. Yeah,
and they taught us that.
Yeah,
instead of taxation and stuff like that. And I actually, this is my old stomping ground. I grew up in Oakville, so I went to Iroquois Ridge High School, and they had a great, I loved my high school program. It was great. We had teachers who wrote textbooks. Our learning was very good. Like some of the stuff that I bring up to like other people, I'm like, oh, didn't you have a tornado unit? Didn't you guys do real life chemistry in the chem lab, like where you blew stuff up? And they were like, no, we didn't have any of that. We literally just sat at our textbook and did that. So the upbringing is definitely different as well.
So this is really interesting. I want to hang out there for a moment. Then let's use the real life scenarios. And if you could pinpoint, the top 3 things that you believe construction actually is and actually teaches young folks out there, what do you think they are?
It teaches you resiliency of body and mind. That is one of the things, because you're going to work hard, and there are going to be days where you're going to be shoveling, like for me especially, where you're shoveling gravel, and it's the most monotonous, pain in the ass thing to do. Somebody's got to do it. So you just, and you just get into that one at a time kind of deal, one at a time. I would say that is like one of the things: mental resiliency, physical resiliency. The second thing is it teaches you accountability, because people are counting on you to show up. So you do want to show up. There's nothing worse. There's nothing worse than you showing up to job site, because this has also happened, where it's like, okay, I'm the apprentice, right? So today is the day I get to learn with this particular journeyman. This journeyman now doesn't show up So now I get the shit end of the stick, and I have to go do the demolition. And what am I going to do? Bitch to the journeyman? No. I have to stay humble and like reel back in and kind of reel my emotion back in as a young man, which is hard to do. And then I have to basically just marry on my way. And then the other thing is discipline. Discipline. Because the thing is, if you're on site, you do not have access to Uber Eats, especially if you're doing high rise and stuff like that. People will make fun of you, by the way, if you go to a high end, like that 1,000-person site. You brown bag it, man. Go make your dinner at home. You bring it in. No, you can't go down 4 flights to go get your Uber order. It doesn't work like that. You know what I mean? And the other thing too is, and you've talked about this, I don't know what it's like now, but when I was coming up, there wasn't the cell phone yet. We didn't have the iPhone.
Right.
And I also was with guys that didn't really rely on their phones except when their wife needed an emergency or to call them. So when we sat down for lunch, we all talked.
Absolutely.
And then if we weren't, and then so 15 minutes, it was chatting. Oh, hey, how's this, blah, 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 jokes, this and that, and next thing. You fucking suck, all that type of stuff. The next 15 minutes, okay, this is what we're doing next.
Yep, you're connecting with people, and you get to know something. You know
exactly.
I know what Mark likes to eat and what he doesn't like to eat. I know what Angela likes to eat and doesn't like to eat. You know, I know what's going on in his life. So thank you. Those are. You said discipline, and that one really stuck with me because I think that's something that's just not. We're a little bit too lenient on it.
It's not that it's not soft. It's just it's not asked.
It's not asked.
It's not asked.
I think a couple things come to mind if I can jump in
Yeah,
on
please.
that too.
I want to pivot over you.
The second one you mentioned about like collaboration or just knowing your impact,
I like
the impact of your work on other people. And the first time I did a hospital, I remember I walked into a room, and it was the first time I was in like a patient room, and there was fucking 12 different trades in there. There was like the patient lift guy, the IT guy, the electrician, the plumber, the floor, like all this stuff. And I was like, this guy has to do his job so he can do his, so he can do his, so he can do his. And there's like 10 stacked together. And if the second guy in line drops the ball, it impacts everybody. So a lot of that, I think people, especially these days where everybody's focused on their own scope, schedule, and budget, might kind of put the blinders on it and only think about what they're doing and not thinking about the next guy and the next guy down the line. So that might help with some
I want
awareness training.
to hang out here for a second because collaboration, and you just identified something that's so relevant in life, right? Human beings, we think. I'm going to say, I'm going to use, we're on Canadian Thanksgiving, folks, for those out there, but so it's Thanksgiving dinner, so it's like. There's the collaboration is so important. I want to do Thanksgiving dinner at 1:00 on this day, right? And then it becomes, that's the mindset without thinking about the ripple effects of, oh shoot, could I collaborate? Can I collaborate? What's everybody else's sort of schedule? How does it impact everybody else? And then what's important to me? Is it important to me to have a whole family there? Great. Is it important to me to finish the job, or is it important to me just to do my task today? You need to have collaboration there, communication.
Yeah.
Right?
So super important.
So going back off of your point, so what you actually just kind of described is something that they call planning fallacy. Do you know what this is?
I could probably guess, but go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So
go.
So in Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, he basically talks about this, and he's just like, cost overages run about 40% plus on projects.
Yeah.
That's it. And then the thing is, but that's if you're dealing with one factor. If you're dealing with multiple trades, that number gets exponentially bigger. So that's why you see something like the example they bring up is when they're bringing the bridge in London. It started out as like a $106 million project. It ended up at $412 million. Because over time, what happened is everybody got pushed back. And the reason why is because when you plan out these projects, okay, the planners never go and get a baseline from somebody outside of the actual company. They keep it in-house. So you don't have somebody else who has optics like on that. So what you're saying is like that ripple effect, like it naturally happens. Just nobody's accounting for it.
Yeah.
Because not many people know the term planning fallacy. Well, I had to learn about it.
So we know about it well because the last people in I do buildings, right? ICI. The last people there are plumbers and electricians, controls guys. And I remember because I used to work at Elliston too, and I remember talking to my boss, and he was saying, Angelo, same thing happens on every job, these big jobs. Formwork, concrete, somehow the schedule slips. They generate a recovery schedule saying, oh yeah, we got 3 years, we'll make up the time. But you know what happens? This chunk gets delayed, and then this chunk goes like this, on the back end. Trade stacking, the time for commissioning gets shrunk, and you're just downloading the risk to the end of the job. And that is the whole fallacy thing, because people are like, oh, we'll make it up. This is our plan. And then the next month, oh, we'll make it up. This is the plan. And then 6 months later, oh, yeah, no, everything's okay. We have a plan. And then you get to the end of the job. It's like, actually, we're going to be late.
And you know what? And you know what's really funny is I'm quoting all the books here, but it all ties in, right? So like Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. So he talks about how when people mess up, how they regress and they're actually only 80% effective. And then if there's another mistake, they jump down to 60. So when you're talking about this, if these guys estimated this is going to happen and then a mistake occurs and they don't own up to it, now that crew actually operates 20% less. So then what you're talking about, this trade stacking, it's a natural occurring thing. Again, I don't work in the same industry, but like when I'm thinking about this and I'm applying it to construction, I see it. And then when you talk about like Metrolinx being so delayed, I'm like, okay, well, how many mistakes did guys make and not report on?
Yeah.
Because again, everybody's scared shitless of losing their job because everybody's in this survivability mode. Again, cost of food, cost of living, all this other stuff going up, right? And then that ultimately hinders them, makes them less effective, and then it impacts the project, and then they make another mistake, and now they're even less effective.
Yeah.
You know?
And then by the end of the project, you've got nothing left.
You got nothing left. And not only do you not have nothing left mentally, but you don't have anything left financially.
Yeah.
And then what kind of strain does that put on a person?
Yeah.
Because I can tell you right now, you don't need to extrapolate to these big sites. You could just narrow it down to one person. If someone's financially strained, they're going to react, act, and go a completely different train of thought than if they're financially sound. You know, the stress is just immense. And then when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, when you're talking about back charges, when you're talking about like
liquidated damages,
all that other stuff,
Yeah.
you know, no wonder people close up their companies when development is done, pack it in and go away.
No,
Because they just need a break because they can't do that again.
No.
I couldn't do that again.
Sure.
A lot of that stuff too, you couple that with like, so there are those stresses and strains on every job, and it seems like every job kind of gets pushed late and all that stuff. But what I found exacerbates the issue is that a lot of times people aren't provided the resources to even do a good job in the first place.
What do you mean?
Just correct staffing, support from like senior level.
Proper bid.
Yeah, or sometimes you're just handed a shitty contract. You know what I mean? And that was another stress factor that came out of some research was people having the responsibility to do a job without the proper resources to do it. So it's almost like they're tying your hand behind your back saying, dig this hole, and you can only use one arm. It's like, come on, guys, like equip your people to do a good job and let them do it. So I think that's something plaguing the industry too. One other thing I wanted to say, going back to skills that are learned in the construction industry, a huge one, problem solving to me, because shit never goes as planned, because stuff always comes up on site. Because take the example, like I was talking with the hospital, okay? You have all these trades. So if one trade messes up or if it doesn't go according to plan, you got to shift. You got to be able to think on your feet and solve problems. And I think it caters to certain types of personalities, going back to that. Because there's some guys who, when they encounter a problem, they're going to be like, oh, shit. They're going to say, Mark, this happened. Like, what do I do? And there's going to be another person that will fix it on site and not need to, and have that kind of self-starter quality in them.
So how does that bleed into other areas of your life then? When you talk about problem solving, where have either one of you, seen that show up where it's like,
everywhere on a daily basis. Okay. Big and
I have
small.
a fixer-upper home. It's all the time.
Big and small, man. Or even like you're driving to work and you encounter traffic. If you're on the highway, you can't take alternate routes, but sometimes you can take back road. Like there's just simple little things. Some people will sit there and be like, oh, this sucks. I'm just stuck in traffic. Other people will be like, you know what? I'm going to try this way and make it better.
Yeah, and so it allows you to accept a little bit of uncertainty as well, right? You learn how much uncertainty you can tolerate, and that's a muscle that gets worked, right? These are interesting facts
sorry, because something else, I had a light bulb. I think we've talked about it, but I don't know if we use the word resiliency.
Yeah.
Because shit happens and it sets you back. And it's tough dealing with change and solving problems all the time. But that's what construction is all about. And I feel like it's almost like a survival of the most mentally fit when you're on these big jobs. The one job I did with Ellis Don, I was on site for 4 years. We built the hospital. And it felt like at some points every day it was something new. It was something I was like, holy fuck, like how much can go wrong here? There can't be. And then the next day something else. And it burns you out, man.
It burns you out.
Yeah.
Well, after you've been kicked in the nuts, let's kick you in the teeth.
Exactly.
That's kind of how it works.
There's no nuts left. Let's get his teeth now.
Yeah,
It's like,
like,
oh, Jesus.
I'm smiling because like you asked where else in our lives do we see this sort of problem solving, and it just sort of got me thinking, and I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable here, but so when me and my wife were trying to have kids, she just left her job, and we were trying, and then she hadn't been able to find work, and then we found out that we were pregnant, and then when we went for our first ultrasound, she had no job. We were single income at this point off of me, and I'm an entrepreneur, so that's difficult. And they said, congratulations, you're having twins. And I remember sitting in the parking lot and, you know, tears are, you know, because we're so happy. And she's like, you know, like, what are we going to do? And I just said, you know, like, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. And I think if I was anybody else besides a tradesman, I don't think I would have had that response, because I'm used to dealing with bad scenarios. I'm used to troubleshooting, and I'm like, we're going to troubleshoot this. It's just like any other situation I run into at work. And the thing is, if I wasn't built like that, I think that would have collapsed me.
So what happened next? Did you create a
So then what happened? It gets better. So just, you know, when it rains, it pours. So she ended up actually getting a job with somebody, and then what ended up happening is her pregnancy, because it's twins, they generally come early. So then she was a high risk. So she then had to tell her work, listen, I have to work from home, and basically, and they just said, okay, well, that's not going to work for us because we need you at a trade show in March, right? And this is when the stirrings of COVID was happening.
Yeah.
And they're like, we're going to need you for a trade show at March, and we need somebody physically there. So if you can't physically be there, and this was within her 3-month probation, so they let her go.
Sure.
So she's now sitting there, and I'm going, well, again, we're gonna figure something out. So she came and she worked for me because I was lucky because the company was doing well at the time. So I employed her, so she was able to get her maternity leave because she hadn't worked.
Yeah.
So again, like one after the other. Like, you know, we thought we were having one kid, now we're having two. Now, you know, she lost her job, and now, you know, she's coming back into the fold. And again, these are just like, I'm not even skipping a beat. It's not stressing me out. I'm just like, this is just how it is. So we're just moving forward with that.
Well, you know, it comes back to the innate skills you learned, the resiliency, the problem solving, the collaboration. Here, how are we going to figure this out? Well, here's how we're going to do it together.
Yeah. And
right?
then it gets even better because then our kids are born on February 16th, and we just got them out of the NICU before they started closing down hospitals.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's and then you know, it was one of these things where it was just like one after the other, but I never sat there. I can honestly say I never sat there with my hands, like my head in my hands, asking, what am I going to do? It was always, we'll figure it out.
Sure.
Let me ask you something, because I can share a similar story, but like looking back now, do you ever think like, that was really fucked up? Like, how did we make it through that? Or were you always just like, you know, everything's cool? Because I know maybe while you think
I'm an edgy guy, so I would say like, if I can survive this, what else am I capable of? That's what it does. Is it creates that drive again.
One thing that comes to mind is like, I think like people are way more capable than what they're aware of within themselves. Like there's this reserve that you can tap into when you go into crisis mode. Because like similar around the same timelines as you, I think I've shared this before, but there's a big gap between our second and third kid because we went through years of fertility issues, miscarriages. It really fucked us up, like personally in our relationship, and it was a lot to get through. So finally we get pregnant. Guess when we found out we got pregnant? March 2020. Okay.
That was a fun year, wasn't it?
Meanwhile, the 6 months leading up to it, I'm basically going through a crisis, and my performance at work is suffering.
Yeah.
So I'm getting talked to at work about, oh, you got to start showing up more and this and that, because I got this other stuff going on.
Which isn't plaguing your mental at all.
No. So find out we're pregnant, COVID hits. I go talk to my boss and say like, and he knew about it because I was upfront about the fertility stuff. I said, my wife's pregnant now. It's high risk because she's on this medication that lowers her immune system because we need to do that to get pregnant. Can I work from home? And they said, nope, you got to come in. So I said, well, what if I don't? And they're like, well, you get it laid off. I said, okay, well, I guess I'm going to come in because I can't afford to get laid off. Week later, get laid off anyways. And I remember having similar conversations. Just found out, we're pregnant, don't have a job because she wasn't working at the time. And we're in COVID. But not once at that time, same as you. I never put my head in my hands I was just like, we're going to figure it out. But looking back now, I'm like, that was a pretty bad situation.
Well, the thing is,
and I don't know how we made it through. To be honest with you, I don't know. I can't really apply logic to it because when I replay that scene in my mind, it's like I'm watching a movie where ultimately this couple gets divorced or somebody dies or you know what I mean?
Well, when you describe it to the common person, they're like, oh my God, how did you get through that? And the thing is, something that I think you learn is that entrepreneurial speaking. That the stress that would generally crush a normal individual is something that entrepreneurs carry with them on a daily basis. Because at any point, the wheels can all fall off and you can disappear.
Well, and even before that, I mean, what comes to mind is when you shared your story of being on a swing stage at 21 years old and the resilience you developed there. Yeah. Right. Just to keep pushing through, and look at how that showed up, a decade plus later in your life. Right. And, it's really, it warms my heart to hear the story you share, knowing the work you do today, on the human side of construction with, what could have supported you better at that time, right? Mm-hmm. Like you were very vulnerable and sounds like you were very vulnerable and transparent with the organization to say, this is what's going on, right? And yet I'm sure it takes a lot of courage and bravery to say, well, what if I don't come in?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the inevitable occurred anyways.
Right.
Right. You didn't kick and scream and throw the flag up. You're like, all right, how do we pivot past it?
Yeah. No, I think you go, like I said, you go into survival mode and you just tap into that resource and you just do what you got to do to keep going, keep the wheels on. But
this has been very interesting. Thank you, gentlemen. There's some huge takeaways here. And for the folks out there, I think we've really illuminated what construction actually is, right? And the adage of I'm going to get into construction to make money. Well, that's a short-lived game, folks. Right?
It's hard.
Yeah.
I'm not going to, it's not a candy coat. It's hard getting in here. It's hard sticking around. It's hard picking a lane and driving it hard. There's going to be a lot of distraction.
And you're getting distracted. I like that word because you're getting pulled in so many different directions. Your bandwidth gets thin and you're just like, holy shit, what do I do next? Do I pivot this way? Do I pivot this way? Do I pivot this way? Do I, right?
Coming from this area here too, when I chose construction, it was frowned upon. It wasn't a path that you take. You end up in a bank somewhere with a BA. Yeah. That's kind of what you do. You don't lay bricks. You want to work hard all your life. Do you know how many times I've heard that?
I think it's still like that, buddy.
Oh, it is.
I think there's the facade of oh yeah, construction's great and there's a shortage and we need everybody. But in the back of people's minds, they're like, well, what society and the media have told me about construction, I want nothing to do with that.
Well, and then I'm sitting
maybe
here
it's changing.
Well, I'm sitting here. I'm looking across the table at two wonderful human beings. I'm like, what is construction really? Well, look at the words that came up today. Construction actually helps me build resilience, accountability, discipline, right? Collaboration, problem solving. Holy shit!
Critical thinking.
Critical thinking, right?
Critical thinking.
So for anybody who's why would you want? There's why I get into construction. It's right there, man.
It also allows you to look at, I don't want to get too deep, but it also allows you to look at yourself very subjectively. What am I? Who am I?
Ooh.
Because again, you're going to be tested by people. If you have bad reactions, nobody likes working with you. You are the problem. A lot of people get through their career and people that's well, why did nobody show up at my birthday party? Because you're a fucking asshole.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a really
Sometimes
good,
you're the problem, man.
You are the problem.
No, that's a really good point.
I start when shit happens, I look at me first.
Yeah.
I look at me and I go, what am I doing that's causing this?
Yeah.
But in an industry so focused on technical training, even with trade, as a tradesperson, you learn how to work with your hands and your tools and your craft. And if you're an estimator, you learn how to work with the software and how to do a takeoff. Project manager, there's RFIs and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, you're dealing with people. And you could be the best person in the world technically, If you're an asshole, nobody's going to want to work with you. And they're not going to remember Mark for being a great mason. They're going to be like, that guy made me feel like shit and he's an asshole.
Yeah.
Your brain is geared towards negativity. Of course they're going to think that way.
Yeah.
Listen, your reputation's all you've got. That's all it is, folks.
Yeah.
Right? So
how are we for time? Do we still have...
we got a few more minutes. What's on
I
your
just
mind?
wanted to... there was something I wanted to bring up, and it kind of ties into what we're talking about here. And I have some stats, but what I see as the biggest challenge right now in the construction industry and going forward is mentoring, guiding, teaching people, right? Having that relationship. And it kind of ties in with the people side, like just some stats here. So I think the median age for construction workers is like 46 or something, 45, 46. 30% are over 50. So theoretically, they're going to be retiring in the next 10 years. What does that mean in terms of numbers? So just
big holes, more work for me.
Well, rough guess though. How many people do you think work in construction in North America? Canada and the States. And
it's not in the States, but I know across the board it's 1.2 million in Canada.
In Canada, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like 10 million in the States.
Yeah.
So say 12 million people, just rough numbers.
Servicing roughly like 40 million, and then the States is more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so you take
16.
30% of that retiring in the next 10 years. So what's 30% of...
You got 3-4 million people leaving.
Exactly.
It's closer to 60.
Yeah. And that's just considering one-for-one replacements.
Yeah.
There's going to be an increased demand on infrastructure, so we're going to need more roads, more buildings, more hospitals, all this stuff, and we're going to have less people coming in. So going to the apprenticeships, guess how many people, percentage-wise, complete an apprenticeship after they start it?
Well, you shared some interesting...
17%.
A little bit higher than that.
23.
In the States, it's 35%.
Okay.
In Canada, it's a little lower. It's like 28%.
That are finishing, or that's the number that's dropping out?
That are finishing.
Now, is
So
that seals? Like, is that like a red seal?
It's not specific to construction,
Okay.
but it's apprenticeships across different...
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So we could actually say that, because I know hairstylist and chef also fall under those.
So that's the same.
Yeah.
But let's... So what does that mean? So in the last 5 years, between 70 and 80,000 new entrants get into apprenticeships in Canada. Okay. So if 25% of them finish, you're going to assume that there's going to be how many? 20,000 a year,
20,000.
saying, moving on. In Canada, we're going to need 400,000 because that's 10% of 4 million over the next 10 years. So you need 40,000 new people in a year. Only 20,000 are so we're half there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's assuming that one new entrant is equivalent to a 30-year veteran who's leaving, which is not the case. So to me, the biggest issue, and I know we didn't get into the labor shortage here because it's been talked to death, because people just look at it and be like, but who is doing something about it?
Labor shortage, and then that's it.
But this is the biggest thing to me, man, is knowledge transfer. Finding a way to onboard. You got to get people into the industry that want to be there and want to stay, like you were saying. Almost
Passion.
scare the people off that don't want to be there and attract the right. Because there's no sense in having warm bodies. You need the right people. Mm-hmm. You got to make them stay. That's pay, purpose, all that stuff. But you need to be able to train them and teach them, or they're not going to work safely. They're not going to work productively. So it's not all bad news, because what that does is it opens up a lot of opportunity for the people that want to put the work in, right?
So you want to know where the opportunity is for mentorship right now?
Love to. If you
Okay. So what I do, because I look for mentors, because I believe I'm an okay mason. I want to be, if I'm considered good at the end of the day, then I've done my job on this earth. I look for masons that do better work than me, generally on Instagram. I send them a message and I say, I have this set of skills and I want to come work for you for free. I give you my time because I just want to be a part of what you're doing. And more often than not, it turns into working relationships. And then on the business side of things, I've been very fortunate because the bosses that I have had, because I've always showed up and been accountable and been disciplined and been resilient, everything that we talked about, they start sharing their life with me. And I've had some very great conversations, and I can call them today my mentors. And, Jim Carrick's one of them. Jeff Buhagar from Meadowbrook Construction is one of them. These guys have had vast impacts on me because they've sat me down and they've said, this is actually the way things are. But the thing is, I had to seek it.
I was going to say, you reached out.
I had to reach out. So anybody who's listening to this, who's like a young tradesman and like, I can't find anybody to like support me or bounce stuff off of, I can be one if you want to reach out to me. But start finding the people that are in your trade that are doing what you want to do. Reach out to them. Start talking to them, because a lot of guys will give you the time of day. They will.
Yeah.
That's what I've learned too in talking to people. It's like, especially as a younger person or somebody like my background who came out of engineering, you come out and there is a divide. There's a wall up there, because trades guys look at my pinky finger and they're like, this fucking asshole, this pretentious prick. And that's how I was graduating, because I was brainwashed to be like that.
Sure.
But when you are inquisitive, and I know you're big on this, leaning in, tell me more, like when you get people to share, they love talking about what people know, right? Yeah. Like I love when people come up and say, "Can you tell me about this?" It lights up, especially with my kids, because they don't usually get that. But like, people love sharing what they know, because it makes you feel important, and you're passing on that knowledge, and you're making somebody else better while you're pumping yourself up. It's a really good feeling, and it's funny because when I was at Ellis Don, we were working on establishing a mentorship program, and the president at the time, Jeff Smith, he's not retired, but he stepped down. Kieran Hawes leading there now. He was openly against a formal mentorship program. And I remember people saying like, what the fuck's wrong with this guy? Like, but it wasn't that he didn't want mentorship. He said it was upon people to find their own mentors, go seek them out. And I think, like you were saying, a lot of people are sitting there waiting for somebody to say, take you by the hand and say, Mark, I'm going to fucking change your life, buddy. But that's not the case.
But the thing is, when you create scarcity, then there's demand.
Yeah.
That's the thing too, right? So if you create scarcity within these things, like that's the thing that people, like tradespeople, need to understand, is that the mentors are going to become very scarce very quickly,
right,
with what we're talking about right now. So now is the time, if you're getting involved, to start doing it, and it will develop into good relationships.
Like mentoring is great. Like you volunteered your time. I love mentoring people and coaching people. It's I know you do as well, right? So this is it. I mean, why don't we? So, okay, thank you for
this. Might be a whole other show, buddy.
Sorry,
I brought that up at the end.
Okay, so I want to end it on a couple of fun questions. Then we're going to share some details, because when we talk about mentorships, we're actually going to get into, and I'll lean closer to the mic so you can hear me. But then we'll get into some details on how people can actually get in touch with you. So a couple of fun questions coming your way. Finish the sentence. You know what? I'm going to start with you, Angelo.
Okay.
Finish the sentence. Construction needs more of, or less of.
Construction needs more connectedness, I would say.
Ooh.
Connectedness and collaboration. I feel like that's a buzzword that's thrown around, collaboration, but people don't know what the fuck it means. Because ultimately you end up, I think the way it's trained is you put your boxing gloves on and you beat the shit out of each other until the job's done. And you fight tooth and nail to maintain your own house and your scope, schedule, and budget. When really, if you just kind of, if everybody just went outside of their box a little bit and didn't pull out the contracts so quickly, things would get done quicker and easier, less stressful. And it might cost you a little bit an extra effort, but somebody else is going to put an extra effort, and it's going to save you somewhere else. So you know what I mean? Maybe looking at it as less of a zero-sum game. It's not an I win, you lose situation, because we're all in it together.
That's
we're all
beautiful.
there to build a building.
And the stereotype is there is it is an I win, you lose. Very much a mindset and mentality, right? Mark, coming your direction now. Here's the thing. There's an airplane flying through the sky, and it's one of those airplanes that's got one of those banners flopping behind it. And this banner's for you. This banner is there. You are able to share one message with the world. This is your banner. What do you want to put on that banner to share with the world?
These are tough questions.
It goes, it's from Atlas Shrugged, and it goes, how much hell you're willing to endure is how passionate you are about what you are doing.
Say that again for me.
So how much hell you're willing to endure is how passionate you are about what you're doing.
Oh,
that is my one takeaway from that book. So you are willing to go through the shit and the muck and that, the low bank accounts and lights shutting off and stresses beyond belief. But if you drive that line and you drive it hard and you stay on course, that is a very good indication of how passionate you are about these things.
Thank you. Andrew, I want to pivot back to you because now I'm curious, right? Similar question, except we're going to reframe it. if you could teach children, and I know I see you light up with children, and I love children as well. So if you could teach children one thing for the rest of their life, what's the one thing you would teach them?
I would say especially, I'm getting a little emotional here because I'm thinking about my own kids, but it's like you fit in here.
Oh,
Like wherever that is, whatever that means, whoever you are, it's you fit in and you matter and you can contribute to the world.
thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for ending it great with some emotion, right? And information without emotion attached, it's very rarely maintained. So this has left an impact on me and those out there. And I think that's a perfect segue to talk about more mentorship and reaching out. I'm sitting here looking across and I see some beautiful human beings. So thank you for taking the time to be here. Thanks for making this happen. Mark, share your details. How do people get in touch with you?
So people can get in touch with me through our Instagram. It's at Craigmore, CRAIGMHOR_construction. Mark at craigmore.ca. And you can find our number on there as well. I'll respond to DMs. I'll respond to emails. Just reach out if you're having a bad day. Like I generally try to make as much time as I can. I will get back to you. I'm very responsive. So yeah, if you have any questions about masonry, historical buildings, if you want us to work on one of your projects, I will take all of that. So.
And I want to just even lean into, Mark's a great researcher, even for books, man. Like, I mean, I know you're an avid reader and
yeah, I don't know why. I picked it up and I just keep going. And, if you're thinking about picking up one of these books that I do post on our Instagram of the stack of books that I read per year. This one won't be as big because Atlas Shrugged took a lot out of me. But, yeah, if you want like a synopsis or snapshot, or if you're like, I had a buddy of mine who's starting his own business, and he was like, is there some books you could recommend? Because I know you read a lot, and I gave him a stack. So, yeah, if you're looking to borrow or if you want me to give you some Coles notes, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you for doing the work you do. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Angelo, how do we get in touch with you?
Yeah, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Human Sided Construction, angelosundries.com. And email Angelo at hsoc.1. Same thing. I love getting random messages on Instagram, whether it's like, oh, I don't know what to do with my career, or I think you're stupid for posting what you post. I'm like, I'll respond to it all, buddy. I love it. It's all good. But thank you for having us on, Jonathan. Really appreciate
thank you,
what
Jonathan.
you're doing.
You're welcome.
And it's always very stimulating and engaging conversations. And these are the types of things people need to hear, because this is really what's going on in the industry. Not always what you see in the news and on the media is like the truth. So hearing it right from the source, like yourself and Mark, and it's just really cool.
I appreciate you guys. Thank you. We're going to
you.
do this again, and thanks for your time today.
Definitely.
Sounds good. Thanks.